Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at a game called Nuclearis, which is basically a nuclear reactor simulator. Now there's a couple of videos out there that kind of explain sort of the ins and outs, and I've been playing with this quite a bit lately, just trying to figure out like what's the whole, what is it all about kind of thing like that. So I finally said, it's probably a good idea to sit down and make a video of my own to kind of throw it out. So in this video, I'm going to be kind of walking you through sort of what everything is and sort of what everything does. So when you start playing this game, you have a better idea of what it is you're trying to kind of like manipulate or like would play with, if that makes sense to you. So anyway, the purpose of this game, of course, is generate electricity. And generating electricity, of course, by using our lovely pressurized water reactor, which you can see the core sitting right there where my mouse is pointing, hovering just a little bit out of the reactor containment room there itself, which is pretty impressive. So the first thing you should do when you load this game up, and this is just a quick little tip, press escape, and go to options, scroll all the way down, and crank up the animation speed. And you're probably sitting there going, well, wait, why? This is why. Because when you run over here to actually push a button, you'll notice it has to go through an animation to push the button. If I'm going to grab onto this knob, you have to actually animate that knob, and it takes time for you to finish that up. And if it's an absolute emergency, of course, and you're cranking on those things, you've already wasted too much time. It's kind of one of those little things. Another really, really quick tip of this game, too, is if you hold down the shift key, you run a little faster. But if you hold down a strafe key and a movement key, you move twice as fast. So if you see me ripping around like a bishop, which is like, why are you doing this? This is Unity at its best right here, because these two speeds actually add together to make you move even quicker. I know it looks really, really awkward, and it's definitely not RP-like, but believe it or not, it is a fantastic technique. So what I'm going to do today is basically walk you around how to get the thing started. I'm also going to show you kind of what does what, so you understand it. So my first stop here, of course, is I'm going to run upstairs, and then we're going to go take a look at the backup generator here. So the way that this plant works, and again, I ignore my little bishop movement here, but look at how fast you go like this. So first thing we take a look at, of course, is your internal supply room. This is where your backup generator is. You can actually buy up to 2 of these at a time. Now, the cool thing with the backup generator, of course, is it basically keeps you going while everything else is completely broken, so to speak. You also have these packs of backup batteries. If you were to run over here and open one of these things, you'll notice there's none in here. The reason being is all of our batteries right now, if you wanted like 20 of these, you could store them. But realistically, all your batteries are actually stored right here. And you can tell by the charge level that they're doing well. And we're not actually running anything off the backup batteries right now. Swinging here, this is your master breaker for this entire facility here. One of the things you'll see here is how much energy we're generating. You also have switches to turn everything on or off should you need it. Like if I want to cut down everything, I just cut the whole system off if I needed to. And again, if you're really, really, really dying for power, you might have to come up here. But generally, I don't think I've had to change that yet. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that this thing does burn fuel pretty quick. This is, it's a big angry diesel engine kind of a thing. If you do want to put gas in it, a lot of people see this and they try to click like this and it doesn't work. The reason for that is you have to have a fuel can in your hand. And if you just kind of left click on one of these suckers and run over and actually then press and hold, you'll see that he sits there and goes, bloop, and just splashes it in. Now, one of the cool things here is you see how this can is still red? That means it still has fuel in it. It'll change color as it runs out of gas. And when it's completely empty, just run over here and dump it right in the dumpster and you're good to go. The next stop, of course, excuse my, like I said, hilarious movement here. I'm sure the game developer is going to watch this one. This is a relatively tight-knit group here, and he's going to go, oh, I should fix that. Please don't fix it. I like it the way it is. So we're going to run in here now and take a look at a couple more buildings. Right through here, of course, is going to be our reactor, is going to be through here. This is the reactor, yeah, and you can stand right up here on the edge and look down into it if you want to be silly. We've got no radiation poisoning or anything. We're not generating anything. This water, by the way, you can't swim. So if you do something really stupid and just take a step into the water, you've just killed yourself. And in this game, there's no what I call respawning, if that makes sense. If you mess up, you messed up. So that's just something you got to kind of keep in the back of your head. If you come down this hallway over here, this is going to take you to the generator hall. And keep in mind, we're level 1 right now with no prestige points. And you can see that this lovely room is where our turbine generators will be. And with time, you can see all these empty spaces here. You can actually add more generators to it. So like your kind of version 1 of the reactor, if that makes sense, is really a version 1 of this reactor. It's very much basic, and you're going to add on to it with time. And we'll take a look at how you do that as well. So let's head up to the control room and start getting this thing rolling here. It doesn't take too much to get it going, and fortunately, the way they designed it is, like, you're going to be busy, to say the least. So the first thing we do is we're going to come climbing in here, and we're going to hit some switches. And again, each one of these systems is going to have its own little switch on the side to activate it. You want to make sure you set all these in turn. We can leave the batteries alone, kind of a thing like that. Again, just come over here, activate it. One thing I want to do while I'm over here is I'm actually going to put the reactor onto standby mode. See this operational mode? I'm just going to like that, pop it over to nominal. Nothing bad will happen, don't worry. Go ahead and push that right there. That's going to click on. I'm going to go ahead and push that right there, snap that on as well. Here's our coolant flow. And again, we'll talk about what all these are in a few minutes so you can kind of know what you're manipulating here. So what we have here is this whole panel is basically broken into multiple sections. This is kind of, I sort of consider this to be the, what's the best way to say this? This is sort of the fuel side of things. And honestly, you're not going to spend a lot of time over here. The one thing we do though, is notice how it says it's unloaded. And remember how I pointed out that the core was still poking out of the reactor? You can actually come over here and push that button, and then it plays this little nice video of you can actually watch the core be pushed in. And if you look at the top now, you can see that the core is now in the center of the reactor vessel itself. So now it is ready to go. If we needed to extract that, of course, we could do that. But keep in mind, you can't pull a dead reactor core out. Again, these things will last for days of game time, so don't worry about ripping it out just yet. But keep in mind, if you did want to do that, we'd have to actually empty the whole reactor, and it's such a process. So this guy right here is our pressurizer. This is a pressurized water reactor. Basically, what this is going to do is it's going to build up enough pressure to kind of keep things going. And notice what it says. If you don't keep the pressure up high enough, you can't keep the refrigerant, the coolant, the water, and basically in a state that's liquid. It'll do other things. So what we're going to do is we're just going to flip this sucker on real quick. And this is going to start using quite a bit of electricity. And what it will actually start to do is it'll start heating up the whole pressurizer side of the reactor. Now, we need this to be warm to generate any power, and we also need this to be warm to basically get things cycling. This thing heats up fast. As a matter of fact, if I were to come over here and look, you can actually see how the pressure is starting to build up on its own. Even though the reactor itself, we haven't even set the reactor off. That's no problem there. This does take a while. It's considered kind of bad form to get this up to temperature before this has got a little bit of pressure and temperature. But the good news, again, is we're just running off the internal right now. And by the way, you can see we're just burning it down right now. So I'm going to leave this alone for now. We have the control rods. We'll get back to that in a second. And then, of course, we have our turbine generators, which, again, we're going to leave alone for a second. But now we're going to float over to the coolant system. So basically, I'm going to kind of put my head here. I wish I had a little mouse. I could show you kind of what's going on here. But our coolant system takes heat away from the reactor. Our steam generator takes heat out of the coolant, and our condenser cools everything back down so that this process here can be cycled. This side of things is basically one giant loop. This is the one that's actually going to be pulling heat out of the reactor for the purposes of getting work done. You can notice right now in this game, we only have pump 3. Once you spend your prestige points, you'll have 3 pumps here, and it makes a huge difference as far as how hard you can run this and how hot you can get everything. At the beginning of the game, we're pretty basic here. But what we want to do is we do want to start to get some coolant going. Now, a lot of people, of course, like to mangle that button and set it to 49%, just like that. People are like, wait, why? And of course, it's one of those things where you don't worry about it that much. You have these things called audits. I hit the tab key, by the way. And once in a while, they'll have these little, you must do this, or you must do that. Or you must get this under a certain percentage. And this is something that people try to do, is like just to kind of like almost get ahead of the game. But it really doesn't matter. So we're going to go ahead and get that started. I'm just going to reach over there, set the speed, start circulating it, because we do want to get that circulating right away. Of course, as this is going, you're going to get a little warning on the bottom to say, hey, you're starting to move some coolant around. Is that intentional? The next thing we want to do is if you come over to our condenser here, do you see how it's got a level? This level is very dangerously low. Once it starts turning into steam, it's going to drop right off the bottom, and then we're going to run into a problem where you're going to get this fun little racing condition where you're going to pop the breakers off. Don't do that. So instead what we're going to do is we're just going to come over here. We're going to hit load in the condenser, and that's going to start flooding it up with some water. So while we do this, of course, that's too fast. We'll do a medium speed here. I'm just going to start circulating it. Remember, this is the thing that cools all the heat that comes off of that. So as we're starting to build that, we'll start to do it. So we're starting to see that our vessel pressurizer is catching up pretty darn quick. It's a good time, of course, to reduce my heating and temperature a little bit. Again, welcome to the control scheme here. This can be so awkward. Nope. Come on. This is so awkward. There we go. Perfect. That's going to start cooling itself down. So now we're ready to go ahead and pull some control rods and actually get this thing going. Now this controls the control rods, which determines how much heat our core is going to produce. So if I set this to 96%, you can actually watch in the little video there that the control rods are going to slide up and they're going to allow the nuclear reaction to kick off, which is going to happen pretty much right away. And you can see how this starts to heat up immediately. So I think we've got plenty of water right now. I'm actually going to shut this off. And you can see right over here how we're just starting to kind of crash up here towards that 100 level. Keep in mind, this thing will kind of balance itself out as it's rolling. So as long as you get really close to 100, you really shouldn't have too much trouble here. So what's happening now is I can see that we're totally warmed up on the pressurizer. I'm going to go ahead and pop that off real quick. And again, 160, and we'll let it run a little longer here. 160 is kind of the sweet spot, but you're going to be playing with it. And you can see my main reactor's heating up real fast here. Whoa, this is fun to watch. Now, it's real fun if you want to have some. That's the reactor going critical there, by the way. That doesn't mean kabloom. That just means we're warming up, kind of a thing like that. And we now have a reactive reactor. It just reacts. It's overreacting all the time. Now, the cool thing here is, of course, now that they're starting to produce some heat here, you're going to start causing some steam to be generated. Now, this thing is basically responsible for that. And the most important value we have on this entire panel is this guy right here, which determines the amount of water, or coolant they're calling it here, that's inside the steam generator. As we produce more heat and as we start to increase the flow of heat, we have to basically manipulate this knob for the purposes of controlling the amount of steam we're generating. Now, if this value starts to get too high, we have no room for steam, you're going to trip the generator. If you allow this to get too low because you weren't keeping up with it, what's going to happen is you'll trip the generator again because your steam pressure will basically drop off. This little gauge right here is basically your magic thing to tell you what amount of speed we need on this, which of course is indicative of how much heat you're pulling off the reactor itself. So if I flip back over here, you can see we're getting real high with the pressurizer. I'm going to shut this off. We don't need that to be that hot. And my reactor itself is overboiling, which now means that's a good sign. We're going to start producing pressure. As a matter of fact, if I hold my mouse right here, do you see how pressure is starting to be generated? But also notice this is starting to creep downwards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and slam that to slow. We're going to go ahead and start it up. So what this is going to start doing now is it's going to start pulling basically water out of this side of things, shoving it in here, boiling it off, and then it's going to take what's boiled off and it's going to send it over to our buddy, the turbine generator. Now, the turbine generator itself is not going to be moving very fast at this time. If I sit there and click on that, we'll go to the turbine room, and you'll see this thing barely starting to spin up in a few moments here. When that starts to do that, we're actually producing some power here. Now, notice here that I'm starting to get very low on coolant. It means the speed here is too low. So I'm going to crank this up to about 40. And what you're going to see is this needle come down as we boil all that steam, and then it's going to start shifting back up. Now, the interesting thing here is if I run back over here, you can see my reactor is still only 180 degrees. We're barely boiling anything right now. But it just gives you an idea of just the tremendous amount of thermal power of these reactors. Now, if I swing over here, you can see that my steam generators start to sneak back up. That means we're providing too much water. So we're just going to come here and crank this back down a little bit. And you'll see how it starts to decrease how fast. By the whole way, hold right click here and you can read the actual value, which is great for trend. Now, something important here is when we produce steam, our condenser here, if you want to think about this as the giant cooling towers, is going to try to take that steam and convert it back into water and basically eject the heat energy from it. When it does that, it's going to warm up. Now, this is when things get interesting for us. That means that this speed, this little handle right here, is determining how much heat we can essentially reject. So what's going to happen is if we cross this magic 100 threshold, that means we're going to start boiling off our coolant. That will cool things down, yes. Also notice, by the way, how this is running away on us already. So I'm just going to grab this and crank it down a couple notches. Again, we don't want it to get too high, but also notice how much pressure we're generating already. It's like just like that, and we're already producing all this much. So let's go run back over to our system here. You can see a pressurizer is a little high, not bad. Our temperature is 250. It's warming up real quick. But notice, we're producing electricity. So we're actually ready to go ahead and switch this off to the electrical grid. Once that's on, of course, so we can go ahead and shut off our generator because we now have the ability to produce our own power. And now things start to get really interesting really quickly. Now notice, I have not touched this yet. I'm just controlling the temperature and the cooling, if you want to think about, not through the primary coolant system, but by how much steam I'm using basically to turn into electricity and how best I can cool it off of the condenser. Remember, the condenser is basically the final place for all the heat we generate here, and it only has a maximum limit of how much heat it can reject. That's just one of those things. Oh, notice how this is starting to creep left again? So we're just going to go ahead and add a couple percentages here. And just because, remember, our reactor is getting a lot warmer. Actually, we'll kick it a little bit higher. We'll go up to 40% here. Swing back over to the coils itself. You can see we're about 360 is ideal here, but again, we're about 300 degrees. We could probably slow the temperature climb here. Go down to 97. And again, that's just pulling it up. Again, you don't need a lot of pull in order to control that temperature. So let's take a look. Coolant system is working lovely here. Notice I haven't changed the coolant system, but you can see my secondary, it's stabilizing. 71, 69. Yeah, we're actually slightly too fast here. So I'm just going to, just like that. Now, another thing that you have to keep in mind, and that's what makes this kind of challenging, other than the fact I'm about to go flying past 360 degrees, is the fact that this condenser, the temperature of this water, is also going to dictate the temperature of the water that we're going to try to reboil to actually get energy out of itself. So if we let this get low, this has to work harder to get the same amount of steam generated. If we let this get high, again, it's going to start boiling off, and we're in trouble if that happens. Yep, we have way too much speed here. Go and click it a couple notches, and I believe our reactor is more than close enough to 360. Notice our pressurizer, by the way, it's just sort of chilling. So I'm going to come back over here. We'll go to 98. And one of the cool things, if you go to 98, you can go 98.2, 98.3, something like that. Just hit set, and that'll go ahead and slow down the reaction there. We're looking at 340, which is pretty darn fast. Starting to get slow here, so we're going to crank this up again. Again, all we're trying to do is try to increase the speed here to make this big gauge get bigger, which in turn is going to cause this temperature to raise. So it's just kind of one of those sort of, you have to find kind of your momentum there. You get your thing, and you can start to see this start to climb right away. Yeah, pretty slow. We can actually probably kick this up to 50, build up a ton of pressure, and then we can get back down to 46. Meanwhile, the condenser is already starting to get hot, so I'm immediately going to slam this into 50%, which is going to help bring that temperature down just a little bit. Now, our reactor right now is at 351, 352. We're rising very quick, and you can already see that I have not touched my primary coolant system. I'm basically cooling the reactor right now with my steam generator and my condenser more so than this. Now, some people are like, well, can you just set this to 100 and kind of YOLO? Yeah, that's going to take 100% of the heat that it can capture off of this reactor, and it's going to attempt to give us it on the other side. Probably go to 99, set, and then we'll go ahead and set that probably even more, probably like 99.5 or something like that. Again, we don't need to produce oodles and oodles of power here, and you can already see we're exactly at optimum temperature, so we're doing all right. So right now I'm looking at this, and I can see that the trend is slightly upward, which is okay. We want to go take a look here, and we can see the trend is still actually pretty upward here. In an absolute emergency, if we need to cool this down fast, one of the things we can do is we can actually slam a bunch of cold water onto it. If you slam cold water onto it, obviously it's going to bring this temperature down, but it's really just a temporary solution to a bigger problem that you're having. And that's just because in the beginning of the game, your condenser here, it's just not that good. You'll have to upgrade this a little bit later on. So let's see how we're doing here. Reactor's cooled off just a little bit. I usually tell people when you're working with this, try to do 2 or 3 like 0.3, 0.2 kind of a thing at a time to control it. Notice, by the way, our coolant system, haven't touched it because we just don't need to. And of course, swinging over here, I can see the volume of this is slowly coming down. So I'm going to give it a couple more clicks here. Come over here, let's see what we got. And we're still climbing in temperature. Actually, we're climbing very quickly here. So I'll go up to 70% on this. Like I said, some people just put this to 100% and kind of forget about it. But ideally, you want to try to get it relatively high so we can capture more heat out of it, kind of a thing. All right, swing back over this side. Check all of our gauges. 358. We could probably come down 0.2 more. And we'll come down, and probably 99 is probably good. Pressurizer 163 is perfect. We're producing right now 7166 kilowatts, which, as you can see, that's not much, but it's not unusual. Like, again, that's perfectly fine. People are like, well, how will we raise the power up or something like that? Well, we'll do that in a minute, and I'll show you how you can get a lot of power out of this thing if you're in a rush kind of a thing. Let's see, our 293, yeah, we could actually bring that up a little tiny bit more. Swinging over to condenser again. Remember, the condenser temperature is really important. You see how it's 7701, 7776. See how it's starting to come down a little bit? That's a good sign. And if we come over here, you can see that the volume here is slowly increasing. So we can actually probably take 1 click off of that. That usually means, of course, that when we swing over here, yeah, see how it's kind of bouncing off its ideal temperature, see its ideal pressure, and we are absolutely killing the nuclear thing right now. We have everything stable. I'm not running around like a chicken with his head off. We're producing 7125 kilowatts, which is excellent. That's actually 425 megawatts if you're curious here. Now, a lot of people at this point say, okay, so is this kind of the big deal? What do I got to watch out for? Well, there's a couple different things that are going to happen throughout the day. For one, what they're going to do is you're going to get a request for more electrical power. They're going to be like, well, we actually want this much power. And you're like, okay. So to produce more power, of course, there's a couple different things we can do. The first thing we can do is we can increase our coolant speed. If we increase the speed of our coolant, that's basically going to give us the ability to run the reactor a little bit hot, but it's not running it hot. We're basically just going to pull up the control rods a little bit so we can go ahead and essentially extract more thermal energy out of it without raising the temperature of the reactor itself. Now, the nice thing about that strategy, of course, is that we don't have to worry about that thing overheating. We can just basically produce more power. The other strategy, of course, we can do if we don't want to touch the actual speed or that we're pulling coolant through right now is we can be extremely silly and we can actually run the reactor hot. Now, you'll probably notice here that our peak speed of being warm kind of a thing is actually pretty high. We can generate a ton of heat. Let me go ahead and show you why this is dangerous to do. So I'm going to go 98. No, you know what? Let's do this properly. I'm going to go 97, which is really pulling those control rods out. So this is going to create a cascading effect for us. First of all, the temperature, this is going to spike. It's going to start shooting up, which of course now means that we're going to have to try to get rid of more of that heat, which notice, by the way, the core inlet's getting a little warm, which now means we're going to have to increase the amount of coolant. See how almost immediately that coolant starts to drop? So we're going to go ahead and increase the speed here just a little bit. And again, watch what happens here. See how that's starting to come back up the other way? But now look at this. Our temperature here is starting to climb again. So I'm going to go ahead and now pop the condenser up to full speed here. We're going to bring the reactor up to, well, we'll bring it up to probably about 400. I think that's going to be plenty for us. And now we're producing a lot more heat. That's a problem in so many ways. That's pretty good there. I'm going to go ahead and neutralize this at 98 real quick. That's more than enough for us. Now notice my control rods are starting to get really hot. If they get too hot, they stop working. Now notice over here that my condenser, my speed here for my secondary here is pretty darn high. But the other thing you can probably observe is the fact that we got a little tiny boost of power. We got an extra 5 megawatt hours basically out of it. But now we're running the risk of actually damaging our control rods right now, which is definitely not a desirable thing to do. Because if we lose our control rods, I hate to say it, that's basically game over for us because we can't control the reactor anymore. And that's a terrible, terrible problem. So we're at 401. We're starting to cool out. 403. Way too hot. Let's go ahead and bring this a little bit higher. Check it. 403.5, 405. 404. Okay, we're starting to stabilize there. Notice, by the way, that we did not touch our coolant amount. We just made the coolant hotter, if that makes more sense. So in doing so, of course, now we're able to produce more steam. But if you come over here now, you probably observe the fact that our condenser is working really, really hard right now to try to keep the temperature of everything down. And we're running with a reactor that's 408 right now, which is really, really high. We don't want to make it so that it runs away on us reactivity-wise. Also notice we've got a warning immediately. Our control rods are starting to get really, 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 really hot, which is a terrible, terrible combination. And notice it's almost trying to race away from us. So we're actually going to clamp this thing down even harder, which shows you just how dangerous this is to try to run it hot for that particular purpose. See how it's turning to run away a little bit on us? We're actually going to slam the reactor closed here. We don't want to take any chances on that getting away completely. 410, notice our control rods are losing efficiency, and now we're going to slam the control rods all the way to that position. So over on this side, of course, this guy's working pretty hard. We're producing a ton of steam right now. You can see we're at 7383, and I've completely closed up the reactor, desperately trying to get the thing to cool off. Also notice our pressurizer is struggling a little bit to keep up with this, which just gives you an idea of just how much everything you're producing right now. But look, my control rods are completely in, and I barely caught it in time to actually have control of my own rods here, which is just giving you an idea of how sketchy that is. So go ahead and slip that off. So people say, okay, so obviously jacking up the power of the reactor, that's dangerous. If we run it that hot, it's going to be dangerous. How do we fix it? Well, the second method is just increase the speed of your coolant. So I'm going to go ahead and crank this up to, we'll go 65% here. Now that means we're now going to be pulling a ton of heat off the reactor. And now, of course, our secondary system is going to be going, what did you just do? As you can actually watch immediately how it starts to react. So if we increase the primary coolant, keep in mind we haven't touched this. We're going to have to come over here and actually fits with this. I'm actually going to try to catch it. By catch it, what I'm really saying is I'm trying to catch it before it gets below like a low temperature here. So we'll do something like that. So now if we come over here, notice we're really struggling to keep up with the new steam we're producing because all that heat we're generating is now being transferred into here, which is now being transferred into here. So right now, you can see right now I'm about 70%. I'm still losing. I'm losing this fight here. Let's increase that just a little bit more, and you can see we're starting to swing the other way. Notice, by the way, that if I come over to my condenser, notice what's happening to my temperature. My condenser, it's going crazy. I'm at 100% right now on my condenser, and I'm barely able to stay on top of this. I look in here right now. You can see I'm just starting to get my head over water here. But look what's happening on my power generation. I'm now producing 530 megawatts. We're producing a lot of energy right now. And you can see my reactor core is slowly cooling off here, which is okay. So now this is where a lot of people run into their first real challenge with kind of the first days, if that makes sense, of the game. And that's the fact that, I hate to say it, our condenser will not be able to keep up with this incredible power production we're generating right now. So now I'm taking a look real fast here. I'm at 2908. We're stable. We're more or less stable. I can actually come up here and kick in a little more coolant off the reactor, which is, of course, going to take more of the energy out of that, bring it over here and heat this up, which is going to produce more steam, which is now going to produce more power. Now, if I hold my mouse right here, I expect this to start dropping. Yep, there it goes. There it goes. Told you. So we'll go ahead and increase the flow. Now, notice the speeds we're at here. We're very, very high on these right now. And we're not keeping up with it. Go up to 80 here. And you can see 2863, 2862, 61. Yeah, there, we're stable now. So now look at this. We're now producing almost 10,000 kilowatts. And if I want to go over here, we're at 575 megawatt hours. So we are absolutely, definitely producing some power here. But the problem we're starting to have, and like I was saying earlier, is look at our condenser. We're at 87 degrees right now. And that number is getting bigger and bigger every time you look at it. Now, if I run back over here, you can see we're hovering at about 370, 380 kind of thing on the reactor core itself, even though the control rods are basically just kind of hanging out right now. At least they're not in danger of overheating. So this is where we get busted. And like I said, in the early part of this game, you really won't be able to run the reactor this hot very long, because once this exceeds 100 degrees, we're busted. And I'll go ahead and demonstrate that in a moment so you can see just how busted. Now, if you come over here, we're producing. We're really producing. Now, if I wanted to, of course, I could crank this up to 75. I have a little bit of overhead left here. So if I wanted to kind of go up to, let's say, 80, we'll go up to 90, for example. And then I want to start pulling off even more heat from the reactor itself. Let's go to 75 here. Oh boy, this is going to be a problem for us. But again, that's exactly what I'm going to demonstrate here. So we're really, really, really pulling heat off the reactor right now. And you can see, even though I kind of got ahead of it, I'm only barely ahead of it as far as staying on top of it. But now if I look at my power production, you can see just how much raw power I'm producing, 600 megawatt hours right now, which is staggering. Now, of course, our reactor over here is going to continue cooling off because obviously we're pulling all that extra heat off of it. Now, again, if I come over here, look at this. See how close that is? We can't do this. This is completely unsustainable. So if we just run it and we let it go past this, the pressure is going to spike, the level is going to drop, and all of a sudden you're going to get a cascading effect between these two systems, and we'll have no water in the system at all, which that's not going to go well for us. It's very, very difficult to cool off a reactor once it's kind of gone critical. So as I was saying before, what we could technically do is come over here and hit this little freight pump switch. What that's going to do is dump a bunch of cold water right onto this, which it did perfectly there. Now, if I shut that off, look what happens to my power production. It's going to start to drop off in a moment because all that cold water basically is going to reduce the temperature of the whole system. See how this is dropping really, really rapidly, which is good. It prevented it from boiling off, but that's going to affect our power production. And now we have this fun little game we have to play where we have to run over here, give it a splash of cold water to prevent it from basically boiling over. So we'd have to do that pretty much for hours, basically back and forth, while continually running back here and tweaking this thing, which is already a kind of a process to tweak. So you can see just how challenging it is in the early game to go ahead and kind of sustain the power levels we have. Also noticing the temperature starting to bleed off a little bit. That was a reaction of what we had done here when we dumped all that cold water on the system. So as it stands, this really isn't sustainable for us. We can't keep this up. Now, some people say, if this builds up a ton of pressure, can you get rid of it? Well, it's going to boil off. But believe it or not, there is a handle all the way over here that we can actually open up in an emergency if we have to, and we can actually vent that if it becomes a problem for us. And you can see the steam generator valve. We can slam that thing open and dump all the steam out. But guess what that means? You've basically lost all your coolant. And again, see how it's starting to creep up again, getting towards that 100? So we're stuck. We can run this reactor like this for a while, but unless you have a buddy who's helping you out like this in co-op, you're going to have a real fun time trying to manage all this at the same time. And that's, again, part of the reason people love this game. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the power of my reactor here. This is much too high. And again, one of the things they do is they ask you to maintain a certain level of power. You can actually see we're more or less exactly what we're supposed to be compliance-wise. And you don't actually earn any points until you've done this for 24 hours straight. So just kind of keep that in the back of your head as you're sort of experimenting with this. And then we can actually pull this down a little bit. We'll go down to 98.6 because, why not? So hopefully this is a good introduction to the game. The next thing a lot of people would be curious about, other than the fact I'm about to overheat the condenser again, is the fact that we can now upgrade and buy things. We don't really have the good amount of points to do so. And people wonder, of course, where should I put my points? So let me hit tab real fast. So what you have is two different types of things you can spend your points on. You've got the machines and upgrades, which are literally things where you can click here and actually upgrade your equipment. By the way, the correct thing to buy first is this one right here because it makes a massive difference in how much your condenser can tolerate. And then you have the marketplace where you can actually buy new components. We don't really have enough money right now. As you can see, I'm like at 10,000. And we can buy components and actually add them to our system to increase our capacity drastically if that's something that you want to do. Again, 3 pumps here, 2 pumps here, circulating pump here, more steam generators. It would amaze you how much these are rookie numbers compared to what you'll have later in the game. So hopefully this video helps you out as far as sort of understanding. The key thing to remember is this heat that we're pulling off has to be gotten rid of somehow. And this is basically going to be your weakest link. Make sure you adjust this knob until this is in the middle. keep this knob high enough to keep this from going past 100. And generally, remember, you can only use so much of this at any time that we're going to use. So like I said, very, very cool program. It's a neat little thing to play with in co-op. And I'm missing a 90% of the game. The other percent of the game is doing maintenance on this thing, changing out pumps, doing welding, dealing with leaks. There's so many more things that you could do in this game, but this is just kind of a neat little overview of kind of what does what. But other than that, enjoy.